All right. Thank you. So if you're in person in the room, you want to make sure that you have both Tableau Public downloaded and the data set downloaded. So we got some tiny URLs there. If you're on Zoom, I've sent you the link to the PowerPoint, so you should be able to use the links within this first slide to download both of those things if you haven't already. The latest version of Tableau Public came out this morning, so it's version 2022.2.3. But if you have anything in the 2022 kind of range, you should be fine. So just kidding. So today we're going to do a few things. We're going to spend kind of some brief time getting familiar with our data. We're not going to go back and do any sort of data cleaning. I would call the data that I've saved for you clean-ish, but clean enough for us to kind of work with. There's a separate Plot-A-Thon workshop that goes into detail on data cleaning, so you can always go back to that and review that in preparation for the Plot-A-Thon or whatever else you might be doing. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of descriptive statistics and data visualizations, the types of statistics, graphs, charts, things that you would be using as you're constructing your infographic and your narrative for Plot-A-Thon. And then we'll jump right into Tableau and look at how to connect to our data in Tableau, some kind of key terms and features. I know the first time I opened up Tableau, I was like, there are too many boxes and too many things, but once you get used to it, it's actually pretty easy. And so it's designed to be user-friendly, but at first glance, it can be a little scary. So we're going to kind of break some of those things down. But most importantly, we're going to spend some time today exploring and visualizing that data in Tableau. Both on Zoom or in person, please interrupt me at any time if you have questions, if you need me to slow down, back up, if things don't make sense. Evan is in the back of the room, and he is a student assistant in the Institutional Research Office. And actually, we were just talking about that. He has spent a lot more time working in Tableau recently than I have. So he may be correcting me or giving us additional tips and tricks as we go along. Okay, so with our Spotify data set, this is actually the data set that was used last year. And Evan, right, you actually won the Tableau competition using this data set last year in Plot-A-Thon. So again, Evan is really the expert here, and I'm just hanging on. So again, make sure that it's downloaded. But let's actually spend a couple of minutes actually looking at this data so that we're all familiar with it. I know some of you participated in Plot-A-Thon last year or have participated in other workshops where you've used the data, but this will make sure that we're all on the same page. So, just kidding. This is where we learn how old my computer is and that it doesn't want to do anything. Okay. Well, okay, so the Excel doesn't want to open for me, but that's okay because I know what's going on. So as long as everyone else has Excel opened up on their screen with the Spotify data, that's fine. I can bring it into Tableau later, which is what we'll all ultimately do. But when you're looking at the data set, right, you have it opened up in Excel, I'm going to kind of be thinking about things and looking at a few things. First, how many rows are there? That's going to tell you how many cases are in your data set. When you're doing that, you also want to think about how they're individually identified. In this case, your first column is going to be index, and that's essentially like the case ID or user ID for this data set. And you want to actually look then at what the level of analysis is. Is it one row per person? In this case, it's Spotify data, so is it one row per artist? Is it one row per song? Is it, multiple rows per song because they fall across different genres? You want to figure that out. In our case, as you're looking either at the index or there's a little later on, there's a song ID number that also individually identifies them. But as you look across, it becomes very clear that it's one row per artist per song. And then within that, there's going to be a whole bunch of columns, which are our variables. And this is Spotify data, and it's kind of cool. Not only does it give you information about how many streams each song has, what its popularity is, but a whole bunch of other music related things that I don't even necessarily know about, right? Like things like, loudness makes sense, right? But there's a whole bunch of other Spotify related measures that it gives you about each of these songs. And so we're going to spend some time playing around in this data in Tableau today. One thing to know and think about as you're looking at these columns, which are your variables again, is some of them are going to be categorical. So things like the artist, the song name, those are categories. And in Tableau, Tableau is going to signify that and tell you that they're categories or dimensions with blue. And so when you see blue variable names and blue pills, we're dealing with dimensions. If they're numerical, things like that loudness scale or the popularity scale, those are all going to be numerical or measures, and Tableau measures those or shows us those in green. So it's kind of a really nice signal to us what we can do with those data right away. Okay, so what we're aiming for with the Plot-A-Thon is to just describe what we find interesting about the data. Each year there's a prompt that kind of gives you a general direction to go. I believe last year it was basically use this data to tell us something about popularity of music and how that comes to be. And so when you're doing that, you can look at it in a whole bunch of different ways. But we're just describing that data. So we're looking at things like frequency, right? How many artists have over 1 million streams, right? Or how many people are in the top 10, things like that. We can also capture things like measures of tendency. Those are your mean, median, and mode, right? So maybe you want to know what the average danceability of an Olivia Rodrigo song is, right? We can also look at relationships between those two variables. So things like, what does the relationship between popularity and number of streams look like? Probably the more streams there are, the more popular that song is. Okay? But all those other interesting measures, loudness, danceability, etc., might have that kind of relationship with popularity as well. But what I want to make clear here is we're not doing any sort of inferential statistics or statistical testing, right? So we're not testing hypotheses. We're just literally describing what's going on in the data. Which brings us to this very important point that when you're looking at those relationships between those two variables, that correlation, that relationship between those two variables does not necessarily mean that there's a causal effect there, right? That the number of streams does not cause popularity. This is the cartoon I always use in my stats class, although I do hope that we do learn this concept in my stats class. I don't actually have any proof that there's a causal relationship there. Or another favorite of mine as a sociologist, there is a relationship between the number of sociology doctorates awarded and worldwide commercial space launches, right? So these types of spurious events and spurious relationships exist all over the place where there's a correlation between two variables, even though there's not any sort of causal relationship. And so you just want to be very careful when you're looking at the data that as you see those relationships, you're not actually then making any sort of claims of causality as you're building your infographic and narrative. All right. So when we're working on data visualizations, this is what Tableau is known for. And if you just kind of Google Tableau visualizations, there's a million cool things that you can try to figure out how to do. But it has a bunch of standard features. So this first image, this show me image, is actually built into Tableau. And so when you are playing around with your data and moving your variables into columns and rows, you can click on those boxes and it will go from a table to a bar chart to a tree map, whatever it is. But you want to pay attention to this information down here at the bottom. In this case, where it says for scatter plots try, it's going to tell you how many dimensions and measures you need for each type of visualization so that you're visualizing the type of data correctly, right? So for example, for a line graph, you need some sort of time series. You can't have two categorical variables in there. The other cool thing about Tableau is that it's designed not just to build a single visualization, but it's designed to bring all of those visualizations together in a dashboard where you can see a whole bunch of things simultaneously, but also use different filters to then dynamically move through and visualize that data. And so we'll kind of practice a little bit of that as we go. So today we're going to talk and focus on learning how to describe a single variable at a time. This is going to be in things like bar charts, which is that first chart there. You can always recognize a bar chart because one, it has bars, but there are spaces between the bars. That's the kind of unique feature that it's for categorical variables. And so there's separate bars with spaces between them, as opposed to a histogram, which we have down here. There's no spaces between those bars because it's a continuous variable. And so there's a relationship between each category across the x-axis. We can also do things like tree maps and heat maps. That's this kind of shaded multi-blue squared thing going on. There's even a circle version of that. And you can make pie charts, although my recommendation is to stay away from pie charts as much as possible. Pie charts in general are not the best way to visualize data in a way that it's easy for people to understand. There's a few exceptions to this. Actually, in institutional research, Evan and I use a donut version of a pie chart, which is a pie chart with a circle, like a blank hole in the middle. One, they look cooler. But two, we only use that when we have two categories. So we're trying to show, for example, how many female students are at CI. And so you can very clearly see that there's a red kind of pie shape for those number of female students compared to everyone else. But if you really have more than two, or in this case, three categories, it's just going to get too messy to actually understand the kind of size differences between your categories. In addition to looking and describing a single variable, we can also look at relationships between two variables. We can do something really basic like a contingency table or a cross tabulation. That's just going to be a table that shows you kind of, in this case, by region of the United States, what subcategory of sales are being sold at this like office supply store. This is from Tableau's standard data set that they use everywhere called Superstore. And so anytime you're looking up kind of examples in Tableau, you're going to see data like this. So things like tables, contingency tables, are not the most beautiful thing. They're not something that probably you want to make into your final infographic or your final design, but they're a great place to start exploring what those relationships look like so that you can make better decisions about how you visualize them, whether that's in something like a scatter plot, which in this case is showing the relationship, I actually don't remember, between sales and profitability, I believe, or a scatter plot that's doing the same. So these are kind of the basic visualizations that we're going to start with. But one thing I want you all to keep in mind is that Tableau can make all sorts of visualizations, and you can customize them in so many ways. You can combine them in a lot of different ways, both within the same visualization, but also within that larger dashboard. And there's a lot of ways to kind of manipulate Tableau. I tended to call it bending Tableau to your will, which is, right, it's not a standard feature in Tableau, but they've figured out cool ways to do things. These donuts that I was talking about earlier that look like this instead of your standard pie chart, are a really great example of that. Like, that's not a feature where you just tell Tableau, make me a donut instead of a pie chart, right? You have to kind of go in and make multiple pie charts and then have a blank circle, and it all works together. But the really awesome thing is that there's amazing videos and great documentation online. And I think, Evan, you were saying not a day goes by that you don't kind of Google something. Yeah. And so, and I do too, even things, I always have to go back and Google how to do the donuts because you do them once a year and you have to remind yourself how to do them. So whether this is you're working in Tableau on your own or you're working during the actual Plot-A-Thon, just Google stuff and the internet will tell you the answer. Not only that, you'll find really cool things that you didn't even know were an option before. And so within Tableau, you can get to like Viz of the day and other things where you can see what other people are doing in Tableau. And all of a sudden it'll be like, oh, I didn't realize that I could, instead of doing a map with the actual states, do a map, but each state is a hexagram and it also fits together and just looks very cool. Or that I can combine things and make, you know, some sort of funnel or other sort of visualization. You can also add images. And so on infographics, a lot of times you'll see things like they'll use like a male or female symbol when they're talking about sex or gender. And you can add those things into Tableau as well, which is really nice. Okay. So let's actually jump over and get started in Tableau and working with Tableau. So if you haven't already, open up Tableau Public. Zoom friends, are you seeing Tableau now on my screen? Awesome. Okay. Oh, but we're not here. Let's see. Okay, now both in person and on Zoom, we're looking at Tableau. So this is kind of what you're going to open it to. The first thing you need to do is connect your data, and it's going to start you off on that page. There's a whole bunch of kind of default options that connect you to files. You can also connect to server data. But for us, we're connecting to that Spotify data set, which is very simply a Microsoft Excel file. So you want to tell Tableau that you're connecting to Microsoft Excel by clicking on it. And then it's going to open up so that you can browse until you find that Spotify data set for us today. I have it on my desktop, but it may be in your downloads folder, depending on how you and where you downloaded it. And then we're going to go ahead and let's see. Sorry, I can't get, there we go. Okay. Once you get that data connected, you're going to see a few things. One, it's going to tell you up here at the top that you're connected to that specific file. Below that, it's going to have a list of sheets. So sometimes, particularly in an Excel file, you might have multiple sheets, multiple tabs within that Excel. It's going to bring those in as separate sheets. In this case, we only have one. It's randomly called IN because that's what it was when I downloaded it. And because there's only one, it automatically populates into Tableau. This is where you kind of drag your tables in to connect them. If you scroll down further, you can then see, sorry, let's get this working a little better. You can scroll down and look at a number of things. The first is, sorry, I'm used to working on a much larger monitor. The first is this area here that's going to help describe the data. It's going to tell you the type of data, again, those dimensions and measures. In there, it's also going to tell you things about whether or not it's a date field or some sort of map related field. I don't know why it is so tiny that I can't see it.
So from the middle, right above the N and 23 fields.
Yeah, I can drag that up. Good call. There we go. Thanks, Evan. Okay, so we can see, for example, right, we have a measure that it's the number of times charted, or we have a dimension, or sorry, the other way around, category, that's the number, the song names, and then you actually see that data over here in this window, right? So you see the actual rows of every single data set and how it goes across. So you can scroll across this way to look at all of the fields and scroll down to look at all of the fields as well. That's the general setup. Is that working for everyone? Is anyone stuck? Okay. Evan can kind of float around and get everyone fixed up. Okay. So we're currently on this data source page, and then there are some additional tabs next to it. The first is it's always going to start with a worksheet that's kind of ready for to go and ready for you to work in. But if you go next to that, that next little button is going to allow you to create new worksheets. So every single visualization, every separate graph or table is going to have its own worksheet. The next one that kind of looks like a little grid is where you create dashboards. And so that's where you then combine all of those worksheets into a single dashboard page. There's also a story feature, which is essentially like a way to work through dashboard pages, but that's a little more advanced and it actually tends to not be used as much anymore in Tableau. So let's click over, into sheet 1. And this is where we can start playing with the data. Right away, you can see, sorry, let me hide the people. That helps me. You can see that show me page that I was talking about earlier. And again, when you drag over, it's going to tell you what you need. Again, those blue fields are dimensions and those green fields are measures. And so over here in this left-hand column, we have at the top a list of all of those measures, and then, or sorry, dimensions, and then at the bottom, a list of all of those dimensions. So it very kind of kindly keeps them separate for you. If you're looking for something specific, if you have a really large data set, right? Sometimes Evan and I are dealing with 150 fields, something like that. You can search for that specific field up here. But for us, we should be able to scroll down and work our way through any of the fields that we need. Okay. Some other things to note. You have your columns and your rows here at the top. This is where you're actually going to drag your fields over to start building that visualization. So for example, I might drag artists over to rows, and it's going to give me a list of every artist in that data set. So it's a really nice kind of drag and drop feature. You can also then scroll down and let's pick something like artist followers. And so we're going to then drag artist followers. We can drag it to somewhere like columns. And then it's going to automatically switch us from that table to a bar chart. But if you click back up here at table, it can go back to that table. You can move down here to the tree map. So you can kind of very quickly move through a whole bunch of visualizations. The issue right now is there's a whole lot of artists in this data set. And so it's a little overwhelming. It's a little too much to deal with. We can do something if, for example, we go back to this bar chart. We can hover over, and as you hover over artists, you'll see a little kind of sort feature appear. It kind of is right there on top of artists. But if you click on that, just kidding. You want to hover over here in the middle of your actual bar chart, and it'll allow you to sort in this case so that we can see Taylor Swift has the most followers, followed by Justin Bieber, and so on. Is everyone with us still? Okay. Even still, we're dealing with a ton of artists. So maybe we only want to look at the top 10 artists in terms of the number of streams. And so if that's the case, we're going to go back over to our artist pill here under tables and drag it over this time to filters. And it's going to allow us to either select the specific artist that we're interested in or pick some other way to filter artists out. So because this is a long list, your first stop you want to hit is none. That's going to deselect everything on that list. If you wanted to do something that was like single artist focused, you might just actually search for them in this search feature, right? And you can get straight to Olivia Rodrigo or whoever you want. I don't know why I'm choosing Taylor Swift and Olivia Rodrigo. It makes me sound like a 14-year-old, and I promise I'm not, but that's where we are. So you could do something like that and just select Olivia Rodrigo, and then she's going to be the only one in your data set. Again, that's not very useful for this sort of thing. But if we go back into that filter, instead of just having Olivia Rodrigo selected, so I'm going to click none again to get rid of her selection. That's way down. We would have to scroll way down to get to her. And instead, I'm going to go over here to this tab that says top, and then go down to by field. And here I can then choose to display the top 10 or any value I want, the top maybe 25. So this is going to be the top 25 artists by the number of artist followers that they have. And so I'm going to click OK. And then all of a sudden, we get a list of those top 20. Now it makes sense to kind of play around with these a little more and get some more information, whether it's in this bar chart or this kind of just straight up highlight table, a tree map. The bubbles seem really popular in Tableau, although I find them difficult because you can't always see labels. But you can just kind of click around and play with all the different visualization options. If we go back to our bar chart, again, we can filter it so that we are seeing kind of the top to the number 1 to the 25th in terms of artist followers, but we can also customize this a whole lot. So we can do stuff. I just clicked on that show me to make it go away so I can see my full bar chart here. I can go through and drag artist again onto color, and that's going to change the colors of each of these. If I was building a visualization for an infographic or something, these colors aren't necessarily meaningful, and they're not necessarily helping me kind of follow this visualization. It just kind of looks like a crayon box splattered onto a graph. So that's maybe not the best option here. And so let's get rid of it and go back to all blue. But maybe because my favorite color is purple, so I can go to color and pick purple instead. Or something Evan did when he was working with the Spotify data, which I thought was really cool, is he took the Spotify kind of color scheme of black and green and made his infographic and everything in that black and green and white color scheme. So it was very like branded for Spotify. So you can really customize these in any way you want. Here in institutional research, we tend to do a lot of things in the red and silver and white to kind of match our school colors and fit the website style guide that we're asked to follow. So you can do this kind of sorting here. You can also add labels because it's a little hard to figure out, for example, how many followers does Justin Bieber have just by looking at this line? It's somewhere between 14 million or 1,400 million and 1,600 million, but you can actually add in that label by going back to artist followers and then dragging it over to label. And all of a sudden it's going to add that label to the end. You'll notice that all of those labels aren't showing up because it's compressed. There's not quite enough space for them. There's a few workarounds for that. Under label, you can open label and then at the very bottom, tell it that you want to allow labels to overlap. In other words, get a little crowded. But maybe for this visualization, what this is suggesting to us is that instead of doing a top 25 followers, it makes more sense to do the top 10 artists by numbers of followers. And then we're still a little scrunched up here. What Tableau allows us to do up here at the top is where it says standard. Standard is going to be your default, but you can also then have it expand that visualization to fit the width, the height, or the entire view. And so that's going to then spread it out to fill your entire space and screen there. Evan?
I was going to say, when you add this visualization to the dashboard, that fit at the top doesn't always apply.
Yeah.
So when it doesn't, there's that size under marks, and you can change the size of the bar chart as well.
Definitely. Yeah. So what Evan was talking about here is this size, and you can kind of make your bars skinny or make them fatter. Tableau in general is well programmed and good at being aesthetically pleasing, so its defaults often end up kind of being the best, at least to start with. Okay, so some other things that we might want to do here. One, maybe we don't want these labels hanging out down here at the bottom, or sorry, at the end of each bar. We can click on label and we can change where they show up. So under alignment, we can move them around. And so then it automatically moves them here. So this is kind of nice in the sense that you're seeing the number of followers right next to the artist's name. You're not kind of having to look across the entire bar. but maybe that white font is kind of too small and faint to kind of show up as nice as you'd like on this purple. So you can go back in, and under font, you can make it a little bigger, make it bolder so that it stands out a bit more. Now, because we have the actual counts here in terms of the numbers of artist followers, when we're doing kind of a graph, if you're in a stats class, for example, make sure that you have all your axes labeled. But sometimes when we're building a visualization for an infographic or something like that, a lot of the dashboards that we use for our website for institutional research, we want to kind of get rid of some of the visual clutter. And when that's the case, you can kind of remove some of these labels and open up the screen a little bit more. You can also remove these bars, the kind of grid lines that are really faint here, so it looks really clean. By doing that, you want to kind of right click and go to format. And then you click on the kind of format. Is it borders, Evan?
Yep.
Okay.
Is there a line one?
Yeah, there we go. It's under lines so that you can get rid of things. And this is honestly how I do it, is I just go through until it gets rid of the thing that I want, because it defaults to all sorts of ridiculous things that aren't even there in your graph. And in this case, is it going to be the last one? Oh. There we go, grid lines. And we can get rid of those grid lines. So we're getting a cleaner and cleaner visualization to fit into our infographic. What things kind of aren't working for you right now in this visualization? What sort of things maybe might be missing? Go for it.
I am like playing around and I can't undo an action.
Okay, so if you, just kidding. If you do something, there is, sorry, you can use this back button. It'll just kind of undo exactly what you did, just like if you were in a Word document or something like that.
I actually have to plug it.
Okay, cool. But I'm not entirely happy with this yet. For example, I think it looks weird that the artist name is much smaller than the follower count on the bars, right? Does that look weird to anyone else? Yeah. So we can go in and change that. You can right click again on that artist name and then go down to format. And you can change the font, change the size, change the color, anything that you'd like. So we can make it much bigger and bolder. Tableau always defaults to this kind of dark gray for text in most cases. So you kind of want to pay attention to that, because I think lots of people think it's black, but it's not. And then you'll kind of end up with some things that look a little odd on your screen sometimes. So you can choose a darker gray or go all the way to black. But now we're in a situation where I can't read all of the artists' names. And so you kind of hover between that name and your bars, and your arrow should pop up, and you can just drag that across to give you a little more space to see everything. This artist label at the top, this is the name of the variable that we've chosen. But I'm pretty sure all of us understand that these are music artists just by looking at that list of them. And so we can also right click there and go down to hide field label for rows. And that's going to remove that artist label. So again, just cleaning up some of that visual clutter to give you a cleaner visualization. All right, there's one more very important thing that we're missing in this graph? A title, yes. It's definitely missing a title. So what should we call it? How about top 10 artists by number of followers? And this, in this title window, you're already set up to make some changes to the font so that you can center it, bold it, make it bigger. You could change its color if you're kind of going with a color scheme, whatever you'd like to do there. And so we have our first visualization, a bar chart that's telling us who the top artists in Spotify are by their number of followers. In looking at the data, what other things do you maybe want to explore and look at in terms of artists, songs, popularity? What's kind of standing out as interesting? We can look at the number of weeks a song has charted. We can look at the number of times it's charted, its popularity. Go for it.
Danceability.
Danceability, okay. So what makes a song danceable? Okay, so in order to do that, we're gonna open up a new sheet. Remember, each visualization is gonna be on a new sheet. One thing that you might wanna do though is name your sheet so you can start keeping them organized. So instead of sheet 1, let's call this like artist followers so that we can keep track of what's going on. If you right click on that, you can also do things like color code them. So if you're building something that has tons and tons of sheets, it's really nice to color code them and group, like all the blue ones are going to be, you know, something about sociology majors, and all the green ones are going to be something about computer science majors, or whatever that is, so that you can kind of keep yourself visually organized. You also have the option down here to change how you see those. So if you click here, you get a kind of bigger like thumbnail of the visualization instead of just that name. And so that often helps figure out where you want to be. I tend to work with just the tabs, particularly when I'm building the visualization, so that I have more screen room for those visualizations. So I'm going to click on the new worksheet tab and add a new worksheet. I'm actually going to delete this story because that was an accident. Does everyone have their second sheet open? All right. And we want to look at danceability. So do you want to look at danceability in terms of danceability by song? Right? So let's drag song over to our rows. This is going to give us a massive list, right? It says we recommend only dealing with at least 1,000 rows, but you have over 1,500. 1,500 isn't too bad, so we're going to say go ahead and add them all. We'll filter them out at some point later on. And then for this danceability, this is the first time we're moving into one of those numerical fields. And so we might, instead of just dragging it directly to the columns, which we can also drag it here to where it says ABC, and it's just going to automatically populate and fill in that table. And so danceability is something that's measured on a scale of 0 to 1. Again, I could tell you all sorts of things about how we measure grad rates and retention rates and things here at CI. I'm going to assume that the higher the number, the more danceable the song is. But again, we have a whole bunch of data here. It's a little bit messy. we probably want to filter it in some way. We could do what we did before, where we filtered by the actual field. So instead of filtering this time by artist, we can filter by song. Again, we might want to skip, instead of all of them, go over to top 10. And we can do that by danceability, right? That's the default because that's what's already in our table. But maybe we want to know what the danceability is of the top 10 most popular songs instead. And so we can use this drop-down menu to go down to popularity. Now, the default for any of these fields is going to be sum, right? It's going to add things up. Well, in this case, for something like popularity, because we're looking at this by song, there's only one row per song. And so whether you do sum or minimum or maximum, that's all going to give you the exact same number. But there are other cases where that might not work. So let's just click OK here so we get that top 10. Now hold, don't necessarily, I'm going to do this quickly to kind of show you what I mean about kind of paying attention to that sum versus minimum or maximum. Because this is one row per song, if we look at something by artist, we're going to end up with multiple rows per artist. So for example, let's just go in here and sort. Somebody tell me someone cooler than Taylor Swift. Beyonce. Thank you. So we're going to go down and select Beyonce. Tableau does not like asterisks and or accent marks and other things, and it just gets a little funky sometimes, but we're going to hope that this is Beyonce. So what I want you to kind of think about and understand here is if I drag popularity over here, it's going to default to summing that popularity. That can't be right. I'm going to go back to Taylor Swift because that's clearly not Beyonce, not the Beyonce that we want. Okay, so this is clearly a sum of the popularity for every single one of Taylor Swift's songs because that popularity scale goes from 0 to 100. And the way to kind of test that and figure that out is we can drag song name next to artist. And it originally didn't want to do that because there's so many songs, but we've already filtered it down to Taylor Swift. So this is only a list of her songs. And if we scroll over and kind of spread this out, right, again, we get that sense of popularity is something that we don't want to look at the sum of if we're looking at it at the artist level, but we can look at popularity and the sum of that at the song level because there's only one row, you're not adding them together. Does that kind of distinction make sense? So you just want to be really careful that the way Tableau is calculating things for you is the way that it makes the most sense for your data. Of course, this would look a lot better if we made it a bar chart and sorted it and all of those kinds of things. But let's go back to this danceability feature. So here again, we're looking at song name and by the danceability. I don't know about all of you. I do recognize some of these songs, but I am definitely not cool enough to know all of these songs. And so it might help to know who the artist is that goes along with each of these songs. And so you can go back over here to your artist field and drag it over into your rows. And this tells us something else very interesting about the data. And this is why, even though tables aren't the most pretty thing that you want in your final dashboards and final visualizations, they help you kind of explore and kind of discover some important things about the data. Like, for example, although we probably all know Taylor Swift's Cardigan, right? Came out during the pandemic, is that whole thing. Apparently someone named Don Tolliver has also published a song named Cardigan. And so when we were looking at those danceability scores before, Cardigan's danceability score was actually a combination of both of these fields, right? And so what we can do instead is a couple of things. One, if there's just a few of those duplicates, we can, instead of using song name, which is clearly not a unique identifier, right? We can use song ID, which is, or index, although index, it's telling us is it's counting it as a numerical field. And so we can change that, but that's kind of an advanced thing. Let's just go ahead and use song ID. It's a little bit more straightforward. And so we're going to drag song ID over into our filters. And instead of filtering by song name, now we're filtering by song ID for the top 10. Again, let's do this in terms of popularity and click OK. Just kidding. That did not do what I wanted it to do. Let's try that again. Song ID, top 10 by popularity. That should be right, but it's not. Let's try danceability. Oh, Tableau. I'm just hitting undo and going back. Let's get back to this and try to figure this out a little bit more. Okay. The other thing you can do here, and this is where we get into these situations where I talk about building kind of bending Tableau to your will. It wasn't filtering the way I want. And probably if I wasn't doing this live in front of people, right, I would spend the next 20, 30 minutes kind of getting it to filter the way I want, but we don't want to do that. So instead, what I can do is actually just go through and on those artists that don't make sense to be there, like Don Tolliver instead of Taylor Swift, we can hit exclude, right? And just actually remove him from our list. So we can do that with these kind of different options. So that's another way to kind of make adjustments, make changes to your visualization. So let me go through, we're just going to do this quickly. Yep.
Does it make a difference in the order of the filter?
So when they're just like this, it doesn't. But there's a way to add filters to context. So if you right click on it and then you click add to context, that makes it filter before it does like calculations and other things. But that gets kind of real complicated and down the line. Yeah.
Another quick question.
Mm-hmm.
How are the changes like this where you're bending Tableau to your will different from data cleaning?
So in terms of data cleaning, what you're really doing is kind of working with the actual data, right? In this case, we'd be working with it in Excel. In other versions of Tableau, there's a feature called Tableau Prep where you can do some data cleaning as well, but that's part of the Tableau that's very expensive. And so we're working on a combo of free things, which is going to be Excel and Tableau. And in those situations, kind of that's where you're cleaning up and making sure that there's only one row, that there's not blanks, those kinds of things. Whereas here, when we're talking about bending Tableau to your will, we're really talking about kind of combining features within Tableau to get the visualization to look the way we want. Does that make sense? Okay. Mm-hmm.
How did you get those numbers next to the art? Mine just says ABC.
Okay, so you want to go back to your danceability field, and you can do it a few ways. One, you can drag them right on top of where it says ABC in your table and it'll go there. You can also drag it to text and it'll fill in. Okay. So again, we're kind of doing a bending Tableau to our will just so that we can keep going. And in this case, play around with some other things that we may want to do with the data, right? So maybe in this case, instead of a bar chart like before, we want to look at a tree map or a bubble chart. Or maybe we want to do something that where we can get into something else, like a line chart or a scatter plot, something like that. And in that case, when we hover over, it tells us that we need 0 or more dimensions. So we're not really worried about needing dimensions in there, but we need at least 2 measures to get a scatter plot. With a line chart, we need date and a measure. And so it's already kind of giving you the signals, like if you want a specific type of visualization, you need to make sure that you have the correct types of fields in there. So let's open up a new sheet and try that. So let's aim for a scatter plot. And the key here is we need at least 2 measures. Let's keep exploring danceability. So let's put our danceability on the rows. And I don't know, probably danceability probably has some sort of relationship to energy. So let's put energy on our columns. So currently, this is the sum of all of the energy scores for all of the songs in our data, and then all of the danceability scores for all of the songs in our data, which gives us a scatter plot with 1 point, which is not very useful or helpful at all, right? What we're actually interested in is the relationship between these 2 fields at the level of the song. So we're not going to make the mistake we did before with using song name. We're going to use song ID and drag that over to details. And now all of a sudden, we have a messy but complete scatter plot where each of these little circles represents a single song. So I'm going to do a couple of things here. One is I'm going to move this to full view so we can kind of see a little bit more of what's going on. This is where I want to talk about a new feature that you've probably seen pop up, which is this little pop-up window. Anytime you hover over a number, a line, anything in Tableau, you're going to get this little pop-up window, which Tableau calls tooltips. And you can edit those tooltips over here in this tooltip box in that marks card folder. So if you click on tooltips, tooltips automatically populate with whatever fields are in your visualization, right? So we had danceability in our rows, energy in our columns, and song ID in details. So those are automatically there for us. But I don't know about you, song ID doesn't actually really tell me much about a song, right? I don't know what song this is. So you can add more information to the tooltip so that you can understand more about what's going on. In this case, this is where adding song name, but also artist to that tooltip area is going to then add that piece of information to the tooltip. So now all of a sudden we don't have to worry about what song ID is and like going back to that Excel spreadsheet and trying to find it there. It's right here in our visualization. We can then do some editing because, like I've said, song ID isn't really useful. So I'm going to remove it from my tooltip right? My users who are looking at my visualization don't need to know song ID. We just need to know song ID. So when I'm removing it from my tooltip, all it's going to be removing it from is that pop-up window. It's not actually removing it from the detail over here. And so when you see these things listed, they have the little icon that goes with the thing that's listed with them, right? So this detail little dots tell us that song ID is still in details, whereas song name and artist name are in the tooltip in that little thought bubble. Tooltips tend to come automatically really kind of boring and plain and whatever. And so you can also play around with those. You can make the font bigger. You can make it bolder. You can change the color of things. So you might want to make artist blue to match kind of the color scheme of the visualization that you have going on. All of these kind of tiny manipulations, tiny changes can make a big difference in the overall like visual appeal of your data visualization, but it also can make a big difference in how people understand things and are able to kind of follow along. And so maybe, for example, so if I click on this, right, this is now what our tooltip looks like. It's a little easier to see and pop up, although I don't know, some of these we clearly don't have clean data for. But even within that, maybe I want to kind of get even fancier. And so, just kidding, I clicked on labels. I can click on tooltips again and do some more editing. Maybe instead of having labels for each of these things, I just want the actual field to show. So the field, you know that it's the field because it's between the two kind of carrots or triangles. I don't know what those are called. I should. And they're in gray. Like that's your signal that that's the actual field where the number or other piece of information is going to populate. And so all I did was remove those labels. And now I'm putting them on the same row. And maybe what I want to do is have it list the song name by the song artist. And if you delete something and need to get it back, you can always go here to insert and then down here to artist, and that's going to bring that artist field right back. Evan?
Instead of song ID, it looks like there are a few songs per song ID, like an index ID.
Okay.
So if you use index instead of song ID, it might help us.
Okay, nice. Let me do that in 1 second. Yeah, okay, good call. I think it's going to replace it with the sum. No. Okay. So this is something that you often have to do. I was just hoping we wouldn't have to do it with this data, right? So index is currently being read as a number because it is numbers, right? But it doesn't know, Tableau doesn't know that we actually just want to treat it like some sort of case ID that individually identifies each of those rows. And so you can force Tableau to do that. Typically, when I'm making these kind of changes, I first start by duplicating the field so I'm not actually changing the original field. You want to kind of always preserve that original field and data. So we have now this index copy. You can also then go in and click on rename. And so let's rename this to index ID number. So it's clear to us that this is the one that we want to use as that unique identifier. Then when you're down here, you can actually click on that little triangle that pops up in the corner. And it gives you a whole host of other things that you can do with it. In this case, we want to convert it to a dimension. And when we click convert it to a dimension, it moves it up it changes it from green and it moves it to blue and into our dimension area. And so now all of a sudden, Tableau is going to read that index ID number as a category as opposed to a number. So it's not going to try to add it or average it or anything else. And so then we can do what Evan was saying, which is just drag it on top of song ID. And whenever you drag one thing on top of another thing, it just automatically replaces it. Okay. And this, right, is really important because look how different the scatter plot looks all of a sudden, right? Because we were treating things as one when they were actual multiple things, right? Multiple songs were getting treated as a single song. So again, you can kind of play around with these visualizations, but I want to show you a couple other things in our last few minutes. So let's, instead of working on a sheet, let's actually work on a dashboard where we can combine these sheets. So go ahead and click on that kind of grid box at the bottom that says new dashboard. And when you're in this, it's going to have a list of sheets, right? These are all the different sheets that we just worked on building and playing around with. And all you have to do is drag them over. Let's see. Now we really know how old my computer is. It can't even last a whole workshop. But we can drag these sheets over and have them in our dashboard together. Now, this is pretty ugly, right? It's very scrunched. It's not working well, right? So we might want to do a few things. One is we can click on layout. Just kidding. We can click on dashboard and we can change the size. This is a good lesson for me that apparently Tableau Public has a lot less options in terms of size than Tableau Desktop. But we can still kind of manipulate those sizes. Maybe we want to do a letter size landscape and kind of spread things out a little bit more. One thing that I find frustrating about Tableau is anytime you accidentally kind of click on something, it thinks you're clicking on it kind of very importantly. So I've accidentally clicked on that one dot on my scatter plot, and now all of a sudden that one's highlighted and everything else is kind of shaded into the background. You just kind of re-click and get it to come back up. Okay. Let's see, what else? If we were building this as an infographic one, I would make sure it's color coordinated and all sorts of other things to make it work together better. But you can do other things like here at the bottom in objects, you can drag this text box up to the top, and then you can put Hi, Zoom. Sorry about that. You're back. Okay. So we're back in Tableau. This is Sophie's. So she was bringing in some other sheets, which are also very cool. No, that's perfect. But you can do some other things, right? So again, you can take this text box and drag it. I'm really having a hard time now. Drag this text box to the top. Whenever you're dragging something into this dashboard area, it's going to kind of gray out where it's going to go. So right now it's going to go all the way across the top. But if I drag it over here, it's only going to go across the top of sheet 2. And so you really want to kind of pay attention to where you're dragging things to get them to line up the way you want. So again, there's that title. It's a very boring title, but it's only across sheet 2, which is just really not working for me. So I've gone over here to where this little like bar area is, and I can drag it again to get it to go all the way across the top. And then you can, of course, resize it, format it, and continue to kind of change it to fit your needs and what you're doing. That text box doesn't just work well for things like titles. It works well for adding footnotes. It works well for adding descriptions. So if you want additional information to go along with any of your charts and graphs, that's a really useful feature. You can add in links to web pages. You could add in images. So for example, if I had an image of Spotify, like the Spotify logo downloaded, I could click on images and bring that image of Spotify's logo into my dashboard page to, again, signal a little bit more about what I'm visualizing and what my overall kind of narrative and story is as I'm playing with the data. So there's a whole lot more that you can do with Tableau, obviously. I've spent the last 6 or 7 years learning all sorts of different things. So we're not going to get through it all in a single hour and a half, particularly with all of our technical issues today. But I think we're off to a really good start. Again, remember the Tableau community online is super helpful and super active. And so anytime you're trying to figure out how to do something, you know, Google Tableau, how to build donut charts, Tableau, how to calculate percentages, or whatever it is, it's going to give you a whole lot of different instructions and videos to help you along the way. Tableau's website itself also has a lot of free resources that you should now all have access to because you've signed up and created a Tableau account when you downloaded Tableau Public. I know we just have a few minutes left. Are there kind of any questions or things people are stuck on?
At this point, if you've got your visualization done, what's the best way to export it and get it into some other place to use it or distribute it?
Okay, that's a great question. So there are a few options. One, with a Tableau Public account, you can just publish it to the website, to a Tableau Public website. Sorry, too many label or things. You can also, if you're over here, either in worksheet or dashboard, you can export it. They're just, right? So you can do kind of save as. Sorry, this is not the version that I typically use, and so we have different options. Evan, do you have thoughts about this?
Are you trying to get it to Tableau Public?
Yeah.
So if you went to the file and save that, it says save to Tableau Public.
I think that's just going to save it. Oh, it is. Okay, so it's going to sign in and actually take us to the website and save it on Tableau Public instead of your desktop. If you have other versions, you can do other things with it and publish it other places. As the person who deals with student data, we do not publish anything to Tableau Public. Right? We have our own secure server where those things happen. So this is a little bit different for me, but certainly when you get those things published to Tableau Public, again, you're going to find that there's a big community there. And that's how things end up in the like viz of the day People win competitions. At the annual Tableau conference, there's an Iron Biz competition, kind of like Iron Chef, where people build visualizations and there's prizes, and it's kind of very exciting for as data nerdy as it possibly is. So there's just a whole lot of different ways to get your visualizations out there. Do you have a question? Oh, no. One thing in particular that people tend to do, kind of once they get really into Tableau, is they tend to build out their resume as a Tableau dashboard with visualizations. And that kind of signals to people, right, that not only do you have all these awesome Tableau skills, but you're working in the medium that people are really looking into. And Tableau is one of those tools that there just are a lot of jobs that are really looking for people with Tableau specific kind of skills and visualizations. And if going to the conference where thousands and thousands of people go each year, there are lots of people using Tableau in all sorts of jobs in all sorts of industries. So there's a lot of options there. Evan and I will be at the Plot-A-Thon, right, for additional help. Evan is going to actually be the tutor. So when you get stuck, or when I get stuck, as we've all seen, right, we check in with Evan and he solves our problems. And we go from there. But I hope this kind of at least gave you a start into exploring and playing around with Tableau. Have fun with it. It's fun, it's colorful. Drag things around and see what you can do. Yeah. Bye, Zoom people.
Bye.